I start?
Yep.
Mr. Casten, Mr. Roskam, welcome to the Chicago Tribune Editorial Board. We appreciate your making time to meet with us. Our rules are few and simple. Please answer the questions we offer. Please don't take offense if someone instead drifts into speeches or talking points, and if we gently interrupt. 3, you're welcome to respond to each other. Please keep it civil. With that, our first question. Last week, Leader Pelosi sat where you're seated. She discussed a robust economy with unemployment under 4%, with growth above 4%. What, if anything, should Congress do to keep the economy's trend lines positive? Mr. Casten, I'll start with you.
So what I'd like to see, number one, we're at a 9-year boom, which is fantastic. It's a longer boom than we've had in a long time, and I think we should recognize the fact that economies tend to come in cycles, and so I think part of the obligation you have at this stage of the boom is to sock aside some money for a rainy day, which I'm sorry we're not doing right now. But what I think we have historically done very well, and I think we could do better, is make sure that we're providing the kind of opportunities for investments in education and growth to survive not just this boom but the next one. And then also to recognize that the statistics we historically have used to measure the economy in a world of rising wealth inequality are not always the right ones anymore. We've had stock market booms, yes, we've had GDP booms, but we've had totally flat wage growth. We've had, in the businesses I ran, we watched our customers become massively more efficient and employ fewer and fewer people. And so the jobs that a lot of our manufacturers in this country are providing today are pretty good jobs. But the people who've been washed out of that system and are underemployed show up as being employed, and so positive unemployment statistics, but underemployed, and so we're seeing this rise in wage inequality. And so I'd like to see us invest in education, job training, and really trying to figure out how we're going to build the businesses of the future that are going to create those medium education jobs that we're losing right now.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Roskam?
I think when Nancy Pelosi was first engaging H.R. 1, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, she was incredibly dismissive. In fact, she overcharacterized it. She said it was the worst bill ever. It was Armageddon. And when the results were described to her, $1,000 in savings for a family, she was incredibly dismissive of that and said it was peanuts. Well, the truth is that in large part, this economic boom that we've seen, which you've editorialized in favor of, is a result of the passage of H.R. 1, and we see that being manifested in this congressional district. So what we ought not do is go the direction that my opponent has suggested, and that is repeal the whole thing. And in fact, he's come out as an advocate for higher taxes on a state level and so forth. We ought not do that. We need to secure these tax savings, and then we need to go forward. So we need to have tax reform 2.0. It ought not be a 30-year enterprise for us to revisit the tax code. Tax changes need to be continuously improving. Look at what happened as a result of moving and shifting to the international system that we did. In the first quarter of this year, $300 billion was repatriated into this economy, which has been good for the United States, and it's been good for Chicagoland. So moving forward, in answer to your question, moving forward on tax reform 2.0 is the direction that we should be going, continuously improving, and we ought not repeal it.
What does that mean? What does 2.0 look like? 2.0
looks like this. So you don't have to wait every 30 years. So when you've got a 30-year gap from 2006 to 26, or from 1986 to 2016, and that's the intervening period of time, you've got to do too much work to get it done, which is why it was literally a once-in-a-generation opportunity. So last year when I came to you twice and urged you to weigh in on behalf of tax reform, that was the argument that I made. Once-in-a-generation opportunity, we either get it done or it never happens again. We don't have to live like that. So in other words, we can now say, let's continuously improve this. So there's a couple of areas. So what I would do in the short run is I would make the individual rates permanent. That's the first thing, and I think we're going to have a vote on that in September. The second thing is to take on retirement savings in particular. We are not a nation of savers, and we should be. And there's things that we can be doing in the tax code that incentivize savings, both at the employer level and at the individual level and at the employee level. So those are the things that are not, you know, they're not grand plans, but they're changes to the good, and I think that inures to the benefit of all of us.
Mr. Casten, I'd like to ask you about tax cuts, but let me follow up first. And that is, they're doing their job right now, but they're also tremendously expensive to do tax cuts, and I could throw a bunch of numbers at you from different estimates up to probably it'll cost $2 trillion. Defend the tax cuts in terms of the cost to the Treasury.
So I don't think it will cost $2 trillion, but let's
Why
stipulate
is it,
that
what
it
will
will
it cost and what's it worth?
Right. So here's the issue that we talked about last year, and it's the same issue that we're dealing with now. If you look at where the debt questions are driving right now, the debt questions are coming from automatic spending. 2/3 of the federal budget, as we know, is driven by automatic spending. That is, Congress does not appropriate those dollars. Congress set those programs up in the cases of Medicare 50 years ago. Okay, so an entitled individual gets the money by operation of law. If you look at the discretionary side of things, that number has dropped. The net, or the actual number of discretionary spending, the 1/3 of the budget has dropped under GOP leadership in the House. Now, then it begs the question, taxes cost money. That's true. So then how do we frame that up? And here's how I framed it up. You borrow money to get an asset that is increasing in value. We do that all the time. We take out a mortgage to buy a house that increases in value. We go out to the bank to buy something that increases in value in a manufacturing operation. And the same thing is true here. So what did we borrow money and what did we get? We borrowed money to get a simpler and updated tax code, and that's manifested itself. And the proof of that is the reflowing of capital back into this country and a whole host of other things that I've seen throughout this congressional district. But the other thing that we get is a growing economy, an economy that is growing at 4% now, notwithstanding the hyperbole and the overcharacterization of Nancy Pelosi when she was completely dismissive of this last year.
There's a lot of words there. I disagree with almost all of them. We are at the end, as I said, of a 9-year economic boom. This boom started when Obama rescued us from the financial crisis, which was a function of a very regressive set of tax cuts and a massive deregulatory environment. We're essentially repeating that mistake right now. The fact that we are at a boom, thank you, Obama, for making that happen. Let's look at the numbers on this tax cut. 83% went to corporates in the top 1%. 35% of U.S. equities are held by foreigners. We have increased our borrowing by 84% since the tax bill was passed, and the CBO said it's because of a revenue shortfall. The Tax Foundation, it's a very right-leaning group, has said that there is no way that we don't have a revenue problem with this tax bill. So what we are doing is not causing money to flow into the country. The corporate tax cuts are going to foreign owners, 35% of them. We're borrowing primarily from China. And there is this Ross Perot giant sucking sound again of a transfer of wealth that's going on. I completely agree with the words that Peter said, that we should be borrowing money to invest in assets. But a tax code is not an asset. Infrastructure is an asset, right? We have done well with tax cuts when we've provided targeted tax relief to people who invest to incentivize the kind of behavior we'd like to see. But when we were sitting with corporates at all-time high cash reserves prior to the tax cut, all-time high corporate profits as a percent of GDP, there is simply no argument that giving corporates more cash is going to cause them to invest. They had money to invest. You know, I know from my own experience running businesses, when your investors say, I'd like some of your cash, and all of a sudden you have more cash, you pay dividends. That's exactly what's happened, right? Something like 28 times the wage increase have gone to corporate dividends. And if we were in a recessionary period, that might be a good thing. Because we're in an expansionary period, we're essentially giving ourselves $2 trillion or more in deficits that are going to be harder to pay down. I have a very good friend at the University of Chicago, was on the Council of Economic Advisors, and he said, when the tax bill came out, he said, even I was shocked at how regressive this is. This is exactly contrary to everything that you learn in monetary policy, right? If you should the federal government should be counter-cyclical with the economic cycle. And so yes, we have a boom. I chalk that up to Obama. Yes, we have a huge acceleration in wealth inequality, which I chalk up to the tax code. And we're not preparing ourselves for what's going to happen next. And I'd leave you with the observation that it is not hard to run a business where your expenses exceed your revenues. Donald Trump's very good at it, right? What we have right now is a Donald Trump-style economy, where we have slashed the revenue side of the equation. And we're now teeing up where, a lot of the leadership of the Republican Party, which Peter votes very consistently with, is openly salivating at the idea of saying, let's cut Social Security, let's cut Medicare, let's cut expenses to pay for these. Yes, most of our expenses are Social Security, Medicare, and the military. But the problems we have right now from a deficit perspective are caused by the tax cuts.
If I can follow up on that, when Mr. Obama took office, actually 10 days before he took his oath of office, he met with the Washington Post editorial board, and he said the entitlements, Social Security and Medicare explicitly, someone's got to do something, and I'm going to be the one who does it.
Mm-hmm.
Someone needs to spend capital on this and rein in the pre-insolvency of these programs. That didn't happen. It's not happening under this president. What do you say to when you meet with folks in the district? I'm hoping some of them are asking you, what do we do to keep these two programs from going belly up?
They absolutely are. And let me separate Social Security from Medicare, because I think they're somewhat two separate issues. On the Social Security side, I would submit to you that we have a problem which is a chronic problem of political leadership. Remember when Al Gore was parodied for talking about the lock box? Sure. We had to protect it, and yet it is always politically easy to steal money from today and leave future generations of leaders. I mean, the pension crisis in Illinois is in no small part because those pension funds were raided 10, 12 years ago when Peter was in the State House, and there was all this talk about we are going to blow up the economy by pretending that our pension funds are going to yield exceptional returns and not keeping aside money for a rainy day. So we have created, because of, I think, political short-sightedness, some challenges that we could have avoided. Now, in all my own career, you deal with facts as they sit, not the facts as you want them to be. So the fact that that was the cause doesn't articulate a solution. Where we are right now is that Social Security is an inherently progressive program that is funded by an inherently regressive tax. The fact that it's paid for by the bottom of the income scale and not paid for by the top. And I know Peter disagrees with this, but the fact is that if you took off the cap on Social Security wages, you would largely solve the solvency problem, which was created by a prior generation of leaders.
So that would be your fix there.
It would be, but I think we need more creativity than that, because the idea of Social Security when it was created was that it would be a three-legged stool where the understanding was that corporations provided defined benefit pensions, and the understanding was that people would accumulate enough wealth in their career to have those three buckets. As Peter mentioned, we're not really a country of savers, so that third bucket isn't there. And defined benefit pensions don't really exist anymore, and I can say from experience, it's hard to, we provided 401ks, but we couldn't compete with that.
Which would be a quick run on your Medicare.
Oh, yeah, so on the Medicare side, every single country that has universal health care, true universal health care, spends less than we do per capita and has better health outcomes. The upper end of that scale spends something like $7,000 per capita. The lower end of that scale spends something like $4,000. And I'm only looking at the countries that have better health outcomes than we do. So if we went to universal health care, protect the ACA, defend the ACA, expand the ACA, and then assume that we can basically do best in class what our other first world countries have done, it's not unreasonable to think there could be something on the order of $1 trillion a year of savings, which helps to shore up. So we have an allocate. You want to make sure that money flows to the right people, of course. But with Medicare, there is both the cost side of the equation and the payment side of the equation. So the FICA taxes help part of that, but I think there's also an opportunity on the cost side.
You want to
Entitlements,
respond?
sure, I'd please.
Yeah.
So I think it would not be helpful for the 6th Congressional District to have an unlimited tax on payroll. What Sean has proposed is to raise the cap. Right now, your income is only taxed up to $128,000. He would propose to raise that with no limit in sight, with no increased benefit for an individual. And so that would be $600 for every $10,000 earned. And that's just on the individual side. If you're an entrepreneur, it's over $1,200 in additional tax per $10,000 that you would pay. That's breathtaking in terms of a tax obligation on the 6th Congressional District. Looking at Medicare in particular, there was a lot of discussion about it. I chaired the Oversight Subcommittee, or I did, at the Ways and Means Committee, and we brought in the person who's in charge of fighting fraud at Medicare. This is a couple years ago. Posed a simple question to them. What's your fraud and erroneous payments rate? And they said at that time it was 12.7%. You just do a quick back of the napkin or back of the envelope calculation, that's about $1 billion a week that Medicare acknowledges is going out the door to either fraud or erroneous payments. That's the testimony. So what's the remedy? The remedy is to go in and to use predictive modeling that the credit card companies use, that is the algorithms that determine whether a charge is fraudulent or not. I've worked with the Obama administration and the Trump administration on this, trying to move Medicare into this direction. And I'm surprised that Sean's advocacy is to protect, defend, and expand the ACA, notwithstanding the weakness of the ACA and its downward pressure on the 6th District.
So we want to get to Obamacare, but forgive me for going back to tax cuts. I can't help myself to just clean up something there. So, Mr. Casten, if you're critical of the tax reform program, and you mentioned the Obama economy, well, that economy probably would slow down at some point, and that's after a long period of basically 2% growth. The congressman is right in that we've written about these things and said 2% growth is just not enough. It's not enough for our kids. It's not enough for the future. And secondly, an important aspect of the tax reform program was getting American corporate tax rates in line with competitors around the world. So tell us we're wrong about those two things.
Well, I think there's a long conversation we could have about what is the sustainable level of growth. I think you've seen all across the first world, the 60s and 70s we took for granted 5, 6, 7% growth, and those have slowed down. I think there's some general trends that I'd love to see it back there. But the reason I'm inherently skeptical that cutting taxes for corporations causes growth is because I created a lot of corporations, created 2 of them. I never once thought about the tax code as a reason of where to locate a business or how to design things. I thought about where I can get talented employees. I thought about where I could be close to my customers. I thought about all the kinds of business infrastructure things that help. The reason I moved to Illinois, which I think a lot of people criticize as a tough place to do business, was having run a business in Massachusetts. I said, I really like being near O'Hare. I really like the access to talent that's around here that comes from a long commitment to infrastructure and investment that was not the case where I was in Western Massachusetts.
Okay.
So stimulating growth and stimulating the kind of growth that we have delivered as a country historically has always come from investing in innovation, investing in education, being a country that welcomes the best and brightest around the world to come to our shores because selfishly, we want them deploying their talents here rather than elsewhere.
Got it.
And those are the things that have been the engines of growth historically, and that's not to say they're guaranteed in the future, but I simply don't see that general tax cuts go. Targeted tax cuts, absolutely. You give me, you shorten depreciation schedules, I will invest every time. I've done it. But if
Right.
you just say you're sitting on cash and I'm going to give you more cash, that's a recipe for dividend distributions.
And then just because I don't think I heard the answer, Congressman, your tax cut program will pay for itself, it won't? You have a number in mind?
So
You said it's an investment, so it's a,
Yeah, it's probably a
$1 trillion
900.
investment?
Yeah, it's probably $1 trillion investment. Now,
Okay.
part of the challenge is our last 2 American presidents, as you pointed out, have told the country Medicare is fine. Barack Obama basically made that argument. Donald Trump has made that argument, and they're not fine. And this is all based on demographics. So in the House, we've moved bills through that have updated Medicare and proposed to make changes that are thoughtful. The earlier we start, the more sense they make. It's been widely criticized by the other side with mischaracterizations saying you want to push grandma off the cliff and so forth. But I think it's interesting, the difference between Sean and me right now on the tax plan, in part, is he essentially just argued that tax policy doesn't influence behavior. I think tax policy, general tax policy, does influence behavior.
Just to clarify, I'm saying general corporate tax cuts. I
Right.
quite agree that targeted, you give people an incentive to create jobs, to get an education, to invest in homes, we do that. This tax bill did the opposite. It
Let me
removed
just-
the incentive for home ownership. It made it more expensive. The bill you passed, you actually would have made getting a graduate degree taxable.
No, we didn't.
The bill you voted for in the House, the Senate fixed it. This was a disincentive in all the things that have grown the country. It was a cut to corporates. That's the part that I don't believe. grows
Look,
the
we're
economy.
sitting a block away from Aon, right here today. Aon moved their headquarters out of Chicago because of the tax policy in this country. Where did they go? They didn't go to some Caribbean tax haven. They went to the UK. When Burger King left the United States, where did they go? They went to Canada. They didn't go to some tax haven. They went to one of our closest allies. General tax policy does influence behavior.
Okay, let's move on to Obamacare. I might say it's well-intentioned but teetering. There are millions of people in the country that still don't have insurance and live in fear of an accident or illness. Mr. Casten, some Democrats have talked about Medicare for all or a government single-payer system, a lot of different terms that are hard to sort of understand. Your website says we must insist on true universal health care, but in your questionnaire you say you don't favor a single-payer model.
That's right.
So what does your solution look like and what does it cost?
Well, so there's two separable questions. The first question is, should we have universal health care? That is an unambiguous yes. There's absolutely no reason from a moral perspective that your access to health care should be a function of your access to money. We could all get hit by a bus, have a terrible disease tomorrow, have pre-existing conditions. Just as somebody with a heart, we should not do that. If you are heartless, you should also go to universal health care. Because every country that provides universal health care, that means that people go in and get preventative screenings. They get access to contraception. They get regular checkups that keep them from being exposed to the expensive. I mean, we have a really lousy universal health care system in this country where if you get hit by a bus, you'll go to the emergency room, and somebody's taxes will pay for it. But that's not very effective. So going to a universal health care model makes good fiscal sense and it makes good moral sense. The question, well, yeah, and so this is the question of the number of payers is where I have a problem with the single payer, because I am highly confident that you as an individual will have different health needs than you as an individual and different from me. And the idea of a one-size-fits-all, I'm just too much of a market guy. I like giving people the options to choose what's best. And if there's a government program like Medicare, I think people should have the option to buy into it. That's not to say that there are people who can't afford to buy in and should have some other funded program, but it may be that your union gives you a good package, it may be that your employer gives you, and by providing that competition, I think you keep everybody honest. And in point of fact, the countries in the world that have the best health outcomes have some model like what I've just described. What I don't trust is saying that, Peter and I are both exceptionally smart guys. I don't trust that the two of us working together all day are going to come up with a Medicare model that's optimum for every single person in the country. And in fact, if you look at countries like the UK that have a single payer model, they're cheap, but their outcomes aren't great. And so you can have multiple payers, which is essentially the ACA, with a public option, and making sure that Medicare and Medicaid are expanded in such a way that if you, for age or wealth reasons, you don't quite qualify, we got to cover everybody in the mix who might not otherwise have plans. But we can do that, and it's not far from what the ACA would have been had a public option been included.
Is he wrong?
I think he's wrong. Here's why. We're in this situation because of the ACA, which Sean a minute ago, and I'll just repeat, wants to protect, defend, and expand. Okay, remember, the ACA, we were told, was going to save, on average, a family in this country $2,500 in premiums. That didn't happen. We were told if you liked your doctor, you could keep your doctor. That didn't happen. We were told if you liked your coverage and you wanted to keep your coverage, that didn't happen. So to say it's teetering, I think, is accurate, and it is doing no favors on balance in the 6th District. If your premiums have doubled in Illinois in 4 years, and that's a fact. If you're in the insurance exchange in the 6th District right now, and you're in McHenry or Lake County, there's only one carrier that is available to offer you coverage. That's not a choice. That's a manipulation into really a failing system. Okay, so then the question is, where do we go from here? I think we need to move in the direction of more price transparency. I think we need to move in the direction of that we saw come out of the administration a couple of weeks ago. That is the ability for association health plans to gather together and get scale vis-a-vis insurance carriers. I've led an effort on the Ways and Means Committee, interestingly, a bipartisan effort to change the discussion about the ACA, and here's how we did it. On a bipartisan basis on the Health Subcommittee, we decided, let's ask a different question in hopes of getting a different answer. Here's the different question. Well, here's the question you want to avoid. What's your view of the ACA? Because it's all shirts and skins. Everybody just divides into their camp. Instead, we said, let's ask a different question. So we said to our healthcare providers, what are the regulations that aren't making your patients any safer? What are the regulations that are duplicative and burdensome, and there's just no percentage in them? And the responses were fascinating. Again, on a bipartisan basis, we heard from physicians, hospitals, post-acute settings, and I'll just give you one quick anecdote. I asked this question of the leadership of Advocate out in Downers Grove. They said, Peter, here's what happened. Medicare came through. They pointed to an HVAC system in one of our hospitals. They falsely claimed that it was out of date. It wasn't out of date, it was brand new. They made us move it at the cost of $1.5 million. And to add insult to injury, you know what was out of date? It was the Medicare regulation itself. That's one member of Congress asking one question of one healthcare provider on one day in one congressional district. And that's $1.5 million.
Can I
Okay, but you voted, but, go ahead.
Well, I just want to comment because I want to clarify. I think there's a very important misrepresentation here. Saying that the ACA is failing because there's only one provider. Prior to the ACA, there were no ACA providers. The fact that people have access to anything under the ACA when before all they had was their employer or if they were eligible is an improvement. But let's be very clear. What has happened since Trump has come into office with the acquiescence of Peter's party has been a complete dismantling of the ACA. The elimination of the individual mandate means that there's 12 to 13 million people who no longer have insurance, probably about 10 to 20,000 in the 6th district. The defunding of risk corridors has made it more expensive. The elimination of contraception coverage. You go on and on. Center for American Progress estimates that for someone in the ACA today, in the 6th district, you are paying $3,600 per year more than you were before Trump came into office. This is not because of the ACA. This is because of what I would suggest to you is a amoral and underhanded attempt to destroy the ACA. So yes, I am concerned that there are not as many ACA providers, but I feel extremely fortunate there are more than there were before we passed the ACA. And I'll tell you as an employer, I completely agree, there are deep structural problems in our healthcare system. I watched every year our health co-payments went up by 7-8% for the 10 years I was running businesses before the ACA was passed. And it was hard, right? Because every year you sit with your employees and saying, if I gave you a 7% raise, I'd be a hero. If I just keep your copay equivalent, I don't get any credit. But it's a hard decision, right? And when the ACA was passed and enforced prior to Trump coming in, those increases fell for, we had employees in Massachusetts, we had employees in Illinois, we had employees in New York. Across a lot of different systems, our increases fell to 3-5% per year. That's still above inflation. It's still a problem. We still have structural problems, but giving access to everybody in the way the ACA was provided was working. Was it working as fast as we would like to do? No. Nobody's perfect.
But Congressman,
Can I
you
just follow
voted,
up on it?
you voted to repeal it,
I did.
but I don't know what you'd replace it with.
Right. So, as you've editorialized, Obamacare was failing because it failed Economics 101 and it failed Human Nature 101. So the notion that Obamacare, that it's the GOP that undermined the Affordable Care Act and the net result is where we are today, I think is an overcharacterization. Here's what I think we need to do moving forward. We need to make sure. Let me give you just a quick example of part of the remedy that I was part of. So we took the underlying structure of the ACA, the catastrophic policies, which are, very high deductibles. Off the top of my head, I think it's like a $6,000 deductible. Don't hold my feet to the fire, but it's a big number. And this is a couple weeks ago. We said, all right, let's take a health savings account and attach that to the existing Obamacare structure. Don't change it. Don't do anything to it. Let's just allow somebody to save pre-tax dollars and attach it to a catastrophic plan. we moved it out of the House, you know what we were told by our friends on the other side of the aisle? That was a sabotage of Obamacare. You know what Sean characterized that when we were debating with Mike Flannery as the host? He said that was a sabotage of Obamacare. It's not a sabotage of Obamacare. By definition, it is bringing rescue to people who are stuck in a system that is not satisfying them. And I think that is part of the difficulty as we're trying to move forward to come up with thoughtful remedies that make more sense. We wouldn't be having this discussion at all if the Affordable Care Act had done what it was purported to do, but it failed. There's twice as many people today who are in HSAs who are in the exchanges. We need to do more work on HSAs, not less.
If I could just make a final comment, I had a couple hundred employees, I provided them all with health insurance. I didn't participate in the ACAs, I saw the benefit because markets were improving. Peter voted to take the health care coverage away from 32,000 of his constituents. If you want to know who you trust with health care, it's not a hard choice.
Here's a different question, Congressman. We've talked about this before. It seems to be pretty well known in your district that you don't conduct town hall meetings or public meetings. Some people may find that to be a good idea, but we've heard from a lot of people who are angry about it. Why don't you meet with constituents in an open forum like this one?
Well, I followed Senator Durbin's lead back in August of 2009 during all the anxiety about Obamacare. Senator Durbin said he wasn't going to participate in those kinds of meetings. He said that they were not helpful, that they were hijacked by people, and you've seen that all across the country, where people come into a meeting, they start angry, they leave angrier, there's booing and hissing, and it's not productive. So here's what I've done. Over the course of this Congress, I've had 475 meetings in and around my constituency, in schools, in office settings, in factories, in nonprofits, in clinics. And I've heard from people who are critical of me, and I've heard from people who agree with me. And if you add all in, I've been in front of about 20,000 people in this constituency. So I just find it interesting. Sean has been a critic of me on this, and yet he's not criticized Senator Durbin on his treatment and his approach on this. And you see fewer and fewer people that are doing those types of meetings because they tend not to really come up with anything productive. They tend to be media events that involve a lot of screaming and a lot of shouting and talking past one another instead of trying to talk to one another. And I've been, I think, effective in getting smaller settings together and actually driving consensus and moving forward on things.
There are other lines of work if you don't like it, right?
No, I like it, but there's also different ways to do it. And so there has been no criticism from anybody. There's been no criticism of Senator Durbin when back during the height of the Obamacare debate, he said, and I can give you quotes of what he said, but he said, I'm not going to participate in those things. This was Senator Durbin. They have explicit instructions on how to show up at a town hall meeting, blow it up, and take it over. That's not what a town hall meeting should be. It's too important a topic to leave it to those who only want to shout and shove.
But I would think you would want to differentiate yourself from Senator Durbin. And what is it that you're worried about in meeting with a large group of constituents?
Here's what I think we need less of. We need less drama. We need less hyperbole. We need less shouting. And we need more of an ability to work with other people on the other side of the aisle. And my experience is that if you're sitting down in a smaller group, even if somebody is disagreeing with you, you can actually have a discussion and have an exchange of views. And I've heard from people who are very critical of me, and they'll go out and they'll tweet about it, and they'll do Facebook posts about it, and they'll say this and that about it, and that all comes with the territory. But what I want to do is try and bring a reasonable discourse in a country that is really running above idle right now.
There's a chorus on Facebook Live pointing out that Senator Durbin just held a town hall meeting.
Well, how nice for him when his party is, when things are quiet. But he wasn't doing that back in 2009.
When did you stop having?
I've done one town hall meeting, and I've been elected
Since
by
you were first elected?
right, and I've been elected overwhelmingly in this constituency. So I think that this is something that other people are more talking about as opposed to the 6th district voters.
Mr. Casten, here's your chance to make an on-the-record pledge to the specific number of town halls. Times you'll stand up and take it.
I've already taken the town hall pledge to do 4 town hall meetings a year. It's a matter of public record, and I am truly baffled by Peter's thought process. The Senator Durbin in the one event you mentioned actually did walk around the front and chat with people out front. The last time you had a town hall, Lehman Brothers existed, Uber didn't, and America had never known a black president. This was a long time ago. And if you find that you make people angry, I don't know, that's not a problem with the constituents. Everywhere I go, there's tons of people who show up. I genuinely enjoy it, but look, this job's a lot of work, right? You got to spend a lot of time talking to people. You have to know a lot of things, have to make informed judgments. If you don't enjoy meeting with people and people don't enjoy meeting with you, there's easier, your question is right, there's easier ways to make a living and to make a difference. And so I didn't take the town hall pledge as a political stunt. I took the town hall pledge because I genuinely like talking to people. I don't find that the people of the 6th District are angry when they come meet with me. And I genuinely enjoy the chance to meet with people where I get an unscripted question, where the questions aren't screened in advance as they are in your telephone town halls. I will tell you, people are violently angry that they can't meet with you. The League of Women Voters has asked us to do forums. You've not responded to them. We've had debates that are never in district, never open to the public. And I get people saying to me, what do you think is driving Mr. Roskam? And I say, I have no idea. They'd love to know.
Okay, another topic. Let's talk about immigration. I can start, and my colleague may have a question as well. Why don't you give us, Congressman, starting, tell us about immigration reform. Are you willing to take action, interested in taking action, either specifically on DACA or trying to lead the charge and maybe finally getting comprehensive immigration reform done?
I did.
What's the problem?
I voted in favor of the bill earlier this year, just within the past couple of months, that would have done 3 things, and I think all these things are in sync with the 6th District. First thing it would have done was provide more money for border security. Second thing, it would have permanently fixed it for the DACA kids. And finally, it would have ended child separation policy statutorily forever. Now, what's interesting is I think there's a group of people who are far more interested in having a political issue than having a remedy. And I would submit the following. The proof of that is this. When Barack Obama was president of the United States, when Nancy Pelosi was speaker, and when Harry Reid was the majority leader, the Democratic Party had 60 votes, and they had the ability to do anything they wanted. And they did. They got Obamacare done, they did the stimulus, they did Dodd-Frank, they got cap and trade through the House, and so forth. They did nothing as it relates to immigration. So I think that's a real criticism of a party that is now sanctimoniously coming over a hilltop saying, they're all part of a remedy, when not a single member of the Democratic Party voted in favor of the bill that I just described. Now, it didn't get enough Republicans either, which is part of the problem, but I think as a reflection of the 6th District, which has massive diaspora communities, and people come to the 6th District from all over the world, they are really interested in a solution here. And for the life of me, I don't understand why a political party cannot take yes for an answer.
One quick follow-up, and then I'll ask you, Mr. Casten. I'm just wondering, are you aware of stricter enforcement by ICE currently in the district, and are you okay with it? That's been an issue we've heard from people about.
So in terms of, are you talking about E-Verify in particular, or are you just talking about generally?
Just in general, tightened law enforcement response to
Yeah, I think
immigration.
I think that's appropriate. I mean, to enforce the law is absolutely what we want from law enforcement. It's a matter for policymakers to come up with a remedy and to adjust the dials for the reasonable compromises that everybody can get behind.
So let's just clarify the record a little bit here. There was a path to comprehensive immigration reform. There was a DREAM Act. 2010, Peter voted against it. That's a matter of record. It is a tragedy that we got DACA as an executive order because Congress failed to pass the DREAM Act. I mean, remember we had the Gang of 8 that was going to get this done. And you have families that are being ripped apart. You have people who have done everything right. You have people who on every objective measure are law-abiding contributors to our society. And when Obama thankfully at least passed DACA through an executive order, in 2015, you voted to deport people who had self-identified under DACA. What we have right now under Trump's actions, which let's call it what they are, it's a kidnapping, right? We first kidnapped the executive order of DACA to go and get a wall that we didn't need. And now we are literally kidnapping babies at the border. There's still 500 kids who haven't been reunited. That plan that's being carried out is essentially the plan that you were voting for consistently. So it's nice that you would change now. But we have some serious moral problems that are out there. Now, what we should be talking about on immigration, we absolutely need to make sure that we make sure that we keep the people out of this country who we don't want here, who pass security risks, and we have to have secure borders, of course. The majority of the undocumented immigrants in this country today are visa overstays. They're not coming across the border. There's a hard conversation to have about how to address that that's really a civil liberties question. It's not a wall. A wall is not solving the primary problem relating to undocumented immigrants in this country. And I intentionally use the word undocumented because when you come here as a refugee, you are undocumented. You are not illegal until such time as the court deports you. People who are coming to our borders and saying, my kids are literally being raped in my home country. I need protection. I'm coming here with my kids for protection, and we're splitting them apart. Right? Those people are undocumented. They're not legal until they get through refugee hearings, but we owe it as a society, and we have always been the country that's attracted the best and brightest and welcomed them. My family, after the Vietnam War, we lived in Columbus, Indiana, and my parents helped set up a Vietnamese refugee resettlement program with local churches. They've become longtime friends. They were at my wedding. These are good people. These were people who were pharmacists in Vietnam, came here and couldn't go to school, couldn't get things done, and are now contributing members of society. Were they undocumented? You bet they were. And now they're contributing members. Why are we going away from that? What we should be talking about is we need to prioritize family reunification and resettlement. We've done that historically. I'm offended that we've turned that back, and we should do it for totally selfish reasons because those are good people who help grow our country. We should confront the fact that we have for far too long over-prioritized country of origin and under-prioritized the skills that folks come when they get here. You know, there was a time when we didn't like the Irish, there was a time when we didn't like the Italians, there was a time when we didn't like the Chinese. I think we look back and we're never really proud of those moments in our history. We're there now with certain Arab countries. This isn't to say that we shouldn't be looking for screening and safety issues, but we shouldn't be prioritizing national origin. Let's look for people who bring skills that map to where the economy needs skills.
So you do skills rather than family?
No, I do skills rather than country of origin.
What
As
is
I
family?
said, we should still prioritize family reunification. We should still prioritize refugee resettlement. But the national origin piece of this I don't think is particularly helpful. And I think there are a whole lot of issues where federal immigration policy has made it vastly more difficult for local communities to do their jobs well. When I was actually in this building next door, I was at the Chicago Council of Global Affairs in their Emerging Leader program 10 years ago. We spent 2 years trying to understand how comprehensive immigration reform was going to affect the city of Chicago, because at the time we thought that was going to happen. And we heard these heartbreaking stories from domestic violence centers who were saying, when you inject immigration policy into local communities, people who are victims of domestic violence stop reporting. When you inject it into local communities at the border, you get local law enforcement in Texas and Mexico that can't communicate effectively because they have to go from Washington to Mexico City, and meanwhile the bad guys get through. We can provide local authority and not overstep our bounds with our immigration policy.
So would a properly functioning immigration system, say we achieve reform somewhat, would a properly functioning immigration system admit more legal immigrants than we are currently getting, or fewer?
More.
Yeah, I mean, we've cut down, the H-1B program is down massively. We went from 50,000 Syrian refugees, I think we've admitted 7 this year. So we should at least go back to where we were prior to Trump. But we need to, this isn't just immigration. So I sit on the advisory board of Dartmouth College's engineering school. I'm an alumni of there, and this is a graduate engineering program. This is 90% international, because if you're studying engineering in this country at a graduate level, you're probably an international student. Our applications in the first year of the Trump administration fell by 30%. In the second year, they fell by another 30%, not because people wanted to go to school, but because smart people who want to get a graduate engineering degree from an Ivy League college and stay in this country are saying, I don't want to come to the United States right now, to the point that the dean of the engineering school said to us, we need to start thinking about ourselves as a safety school.
So how would you handle lower skill workers?
Well, it is still a skill question, right? we have an economy that has kind of a bell curve of skill distributions. We have a few high school dropouts, a few PhDs, and a lot of people in the middle. The fact that we have increasingly, through globalization, through automation, we've increasingly kind of hollowed out. We've gotten very good at creating low-skill jobs, very good at creating high-skill jobs. I saw this. Our companies we served, we had 6,000 people who depended on us for their utilities. They employed 60,000 people 10 years ago with half as much economic activity. The jobs that were lost were kind of backbreaking jobs, but those people are now underemployed. And the challenge with those low-skilled immigration folks is that if you had a good job that was consistent with your skills and your factory automated away or moved to China, and now you're working as an Uber driver, you're still employed. But you're now competing with somebody who's coming in basically to solve a supply-demand problem in the economy. And you got kicked by the economy once in the first instance and kicked in the second instance. And
so what's your
it's led
solution?
to a lot of xenophobia. The solution to that is back to our tax conversation. We need to figure out how to make sure that our economy continues to innovate whole new industries. Ever since the cotton gin, we've been nervous about the robots taking over, right? And we invented electricity, we invented the automobile, we invented the aerospace industry, we invented the semiconductor industry. I don't know what that industry of the future is going to be, but we have always done that because first we invested in education. Second, we made sure that our immigration policy made sure that the Nikolai Teslas and Sergey Brins wanted to come and deploy their talents here rather than telling us what they're saying at Dartmouth. I'd rather go to school somewhere in
Can I
another country.
respond?
Mr. Roskam wants to answer this.
I had a very interesting meeting with a group of undocumented moms in my constituency. And they came in, and they were led by a group of activists and so forth, and some of the activists I'd known. And I said, basically, we've been having the same discussion in this country on immigration for 30 years. We're basically at the same point, and we're nowhere, and we're really spinning our wheels. So how do you change the dynamic? And I made this proposal to the mothers, and I asked them, what do you think of this? And so I'll tell you what I told them. I said, I think that the first thing we need to do is to get the border under control, and there's reasonable ways to do that that don't mean a wall across the whole border and so forth, but to get the border so that it's under control. And then what happens? The drama drops in the equation, and you have an entirely different environment in which to have a discussion. Then the next step is we need to work out a guest worker program where 6 district companies that need workers, it comes through, it's rational, it's normalized, they go through a system and so forth. Next thing we need to do is everybody who's getting a PhD at the Illinois Institute of Technology or U of I in a STEMs, we should staple a green card and say, move next to the Roskams in Wheaton and start a business in Carroll Stream. We don't want you moving back to your country of origin. We want you to stay here. Those are all new people that we would be welcoming in. And then finally, after you've done all of those things, then you can say, all right, what do you want to do with 12 million people who are here and they don't have documentation? But you see how the entire framework of the discussion has changed, and you can get where the shriller voices on both sides of this issue who don't want a remedy, they're kind of marginalized at that point. And then you can come in and you can say, 12 million people are not going to be thrown out of this country. Number one, we would be scandalized by the federal power that would require. We're not going to do that. And number two, removing 12 million customers and workers would force us into a recession. And then you can have an entirely different discussion that's far more fruitful and far more positive to try and get to a remedy. But this
Thank
stuff
you.
doesn't happen overnight.
Thanks. We've got about 10 minutes left, so brevity appreciated. Congressman, you won your last election, but your district went for Hillary Clinton by 7 percentage points. What do you think of President Trump's performance?
I think he's done a middling job in terms of performance. So on the things where I've agreed with the president on, particularly on tax cuts, moving the embassy to Jerusalem, enhanced sanctions on the Russians, the types of moves that he's done in terms of putting Neil Gorsuch on the court, getting out of, or just reasserting and rebuilding the military, I think he's done, I've supported that. On areas where we've disagreed, though, I've been vocal in disagreement. I stood up to him when he wanted to cut Great Lakes cleanup funding by 95%. I have voted against his direction on a controversial thing as it relates to individuals with disabilities. I was quick to speak out against the child separation policy. I've been actively advocating in a direction that is not the administration's directions on tariff policy and voted, notwithstanding Sean's misrepresentation on Twitter, which he subsequently deleted, voted against the president on a CHIP program, comprehensive health insurance program. So you take my point.
Right, okay.
Bottom line is, I think the responsibility of a representative is to reflect a constituency to Washington, to work with an administration when appropriate, and to work against an administration when appropriate.
Mr. Casten, it would be a softball to ask you about the president. Instead, where do you fit in the Democratic Party tent? And for example, would you support Nancy Pelosi to return to Speaker if the Democrats take control?
Well, so I don't know what the Democratic Party tent is because this is my first time running for office. I can tell you that the values that I hold have plenty of room for comfort in the Democratic Party. And, look, as a guy who started and built a business, and, if not obvious, I'm a white guy, you'd think I'd find some commonality with the Republican Party, and I think their values are so at odds with my values and so at odds with the district. I mean, Peter votes with Donald Trump 94% of the time. The district is overwhelmingly pro-choice. That's not Peter. The district is overwhelmingly opposed to ACA repeal. The district overwhelmingly dislikes the tax bill. The district overwhelmingly wants gun control. None of those things are where he's voted. But within the Democratic Party, I am a firm believer in markets. I'm a firm believer in making sure we have a social safety net. I'm a firm believer in making sure that we leave a better planet for our kids than we inherited. And there's plenty of room for those views in the party. With respect to your question, the vote for Speaker is an extremely important decision. I do not know all the candidates who are running, and I have told everybody in public, constituents, friends, and even those members of Congress right now, when I know who's running, I will interview each of you and make a decision. But I'm absolutely not going to tell you right now who I'm going to vote for because I want to understand what the choices are. I don't like being an uninformed voter.
Congressman, in light of the Paul Manafort conviction and the Michael Cohen plea and what Michael Cohen said about the president, would you say the president is ethical, and has this administration been ethical?
Well, I think the president has demonstrated a lot to be desired as it relates to being forthcoming on any number of these issues, and I think the record's obvious on that. Where we move forward from a legal point...
I'm not asking about being forthcoming. I'm asking you if you think he is ethical.
So, never telling a lie, Abraham Lincoln, is that the standard? No, I wouldn't put him in that category. I think that he's misrepresented things that are obviously misrepresentations. I think a number of other folks who are in public life today have done the same thing. Now, they're not
It's a
president of the
simple
United
question,
States.
Congressman.
Right, I'm answering it. So they're not president of the United States. So to be asking and having these discussions about the president, I think is a troubling thing inherently.
How does it impact your race? I mean, what, on a day like yesterday, can you quantify for us in the district how Trump's behavior makes it harder for you as a candidate?
I think Trump's behavior is a mixed bag. So on the one hand, I think I disagree with Sean's characterization of tax policy, ACA policy, and so forth. And this will be litigated on November 6th when we're going to find out what direction the 6th district wants to go. So I'm aware, obviously, of the environment in which I'm operating, but this is a district that's been very discerning in the past. I won this district overwhelmingly with Barack Obama at the top of the ticket, who outperformed even Hillary Clinton significantly. So this is not new territory for me, and this is a district that is discerning. I think it's interesting today that Sean is backing away from the orthodoxy, basically, that he was claiming during his primary, where he looked into the camera and was against his opponent, Kelly Mazeski, and described himself as the progressive that was able to take this to Washington, D.C. And today he's very much hedging against that characterization.
That's decidedly not what I said.
Let me ask you.
Oh, it absolutely is. We'll send you the link.
Let me just ask you two broad questions to each of you. Sean, we've written a lot about Illinois exodus and a lot of residents leaving because they're tired of their property tax burden in particular, which is obviously a local issue. But in the debate on Fox 32, the congressman listed like 9 or 10 tax hikes that you support. Do you understand that voters feel taxed out? And is there, it just seems like all of your proposals require more investment, more taxation. How taxed out are your residents, and where are you willing to hold the line to protect them?
Let me clarify, because one of the things that I find is unusual perhaps in this new line of work I'm pursuing. We have conversations about economic matters and politics that would fail a freshman capital budgeting class. Taxes and investment are two different things. And we don't have a national balance sheet. So we don't differentiate between things where if we can borrow money at 3% and invest it in something that's going to yield 7, 8%, we should take that trade, right? We have this conversation in the context of deficits. What I have said is that where we can spend money as a country, we need to make sure that we have revenues to cover our expenses. But where we're spending on things that are investing and growing the future, we should do that and not get caught up in whether it's a deficit any more than you would think about, should I take out a mortgage to buy a home that's worth more than the value of my mortgage? We don't have that conversation here. With respect to local taxes, there's a lot of people angry about the property tax caps that Peter put in and the limitations on deductibility. There's a lot of concerns that people have that their withholding is too low right now and they're going to get hit with a bigger tax bill in April when it comes through. But I want to share with you a story. We took over and acquired all of the utilities at Kodak in Rochester. And the mayor of Rochester spent about a year with me trying to understand whether I knew what I was doing, because we were converting coal boilers to gas. We were becoming a major force in that community. We made the largest investment in that park that had ever been made in Rochester in 20 years. And I said to him after our 4th or 5th meeting, why are you spending so much time with me? I'm a nice guy, but surely you've got a city to run. And he said, the challenge that I have as the mayor of a city is that the federal government has the authority to print money and to raise taxes and can never go bankrupt. They have made a habit in recent years of kicking obligations down to the state, who has the authority to raise taxes and can't go bankrupt, and the states have made a habit of kicking responsibilities down to the cities, who have no such protection. And he said, I'm meeting with you because I know that if you mess up, I'm the one holding the bag.
Sean.
I've lost faith in
Yeah,
others to
Mike,
provide that.
I understand all that. My question is, we hear a lot from people who are overtaxed. They feel overburdened. They are
Yes.
leaving, a lot of them upper income people in your district. What can you say as a
And what I would
candidate
like-
for Congress? And can you address the taxes the litany of tax hikes that you support?
So what I would like to see, number one, the current tax bill gave us $2 trillion in deficits. Repealing that tax bill is a tax hike, but it is getting our country in order. The reason I mention the local taxes is because we as Illinois, as Congressman Foster has regularly pointed out, are a payer state. We pay vastly more money to the federal government than we receive back from the federal government. That's doubly true in the 6th district because we pay vastly more money to Springfield than we get back from Springfield. Now, to some degree, that's a federal problem. But we have a fiscal problem in Illinois in no small part because we're sending so much of our money to the federal government and not getting investment in return. And we as the federal government should be fixing that. We should make sure we have the resources to fix that. But we shouldn't leave all the obligation on schools and local communities to provide services because the services still have to be provided.
Congressman, to you, for Republican voters who are frustrated that having control of both houses has not led to a repeal of Obamacare, has not led to smaller government, has not led to less spending, has not led to a big entitlement reform, all the reasons that people keep sending Republicans to Washington, what can you do to convince voters that you're actually going to get these things done?
So you got to blow up the Senate filibuster rule. Therein lies the problem, because as long as you require 60 votes to get on any matter in the United States Senate to even consider it, and that's what has to happen, then you're going to continue to operate in the Senate on a bipartisan basis. And Chuck Schumer, as we've seen, has been very unwilling to engage on a lot of those things. So we've had two exceptions to that. One is they decided to blow up the Senate filibuster rule on Supreme Court nominees, and I would argue that that's a good thing. Otherwise, Neil Gorsuch wouldn't be on the court. All through a complicated budget process, we were allowed one vote one time that allowed us to get the tax cuts bill through to the president's desk. Now, I think that just kind of to take a step back, there is probably no bigger difference between us, the two of us as candidates, than that the interchange that we just had on taxes. You gave Sean an opportunity to walk back from any tax hike, and he didn't. He didn't with Mike Flannery. He didn't with Craig Dellamore. He continues to insist that the problem, and today was a new argument, that the fiscal problem in Illinois is based on sending too much money to Washington. I've not heard that before. I'm not persuaded by it. But the 6th District cannot afford the tax burden that Sean would put upon them.
Gentlemen, we've got 2 minutes left. I'm home. It's Wednesday afternoon. You knock on my door. I'll give you 60 seconds. Then I'm going to give this guy 60 seconds. Why should I vote for the Republican in this race?
You should vote for the Republican in this race because I'm somebody who can bring people together. Because I'm somebody that the Lugar Center at Georgetown University said was the most bipartisan member of the Illinois congressional delegation. I was persuasive enough to get every Democrat to join with me in the House of Representatives to take authority away from the IRS when they were persuaded that they wanted to go in a different direction. I was the person that John Lewis, the civil rights icon, quoted, and he said that he had never seen a spirit of bipartisanship, never seen this bipartisanship on this committee on any other issue. So I'm somebody that has been able to bring people together and at the same time advocating policies that reflect the district, bringing tax relief, trying to bring relief as it relates to health care, and reflecting a constituency to stand up to the administration when appropriate and also to work with the administration when appropriate.
And you also stay under a minute. Mr. Casten,
Well,
why should I vote for you?
I'll tell you what a guy told me yesterday who said, I've always voted Republican, and this is no longer about right and left, this is about right and wrong. I don't care what letter hangs after your name. The question is, are you going to make decisions based on facts? Are you going to surround yourself by people of good character? And can you prove that you have done it? My opponent has been a rubber stamp for Donald Trump. He votes more consistently with Trump than all but 9 other members of Congress. And this is in a district that is not that district. This district desperately wants someone who will act as a check and balance. I don't care what the party of the president is. I don't care who the speaker is. You have an obligation to represent your district and to serve as a check and balance. My failure is that I've always been a CEO. I don't know how to take orders from people very well, but I absolutely know how to put character first and facts and surround myself with good people. I'm going to continue to do that in this job.
You also know how to stand under a minute. Mr. Roskam, Mr. Casten, thanks very much. It's a great session. You've both been good to work with before today and today, so we thank you both for that.